Welcome to the Secret Sauce of Selling podcast, the ultimate guide and sales gym to unlocking the secrets of successful selling and sales leadership. I'm your host, James Abraham, and I'm super excited to be here today to share insights, tactics, and strategies to help you take your sales performance and sales leadership game to the next level with a super special guest. Today we have Leslie Venetz, and Leslie Venetz is super special, and we'll figure out why in a minute. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, James. Excited for this conversation.
My pleasure. And Leslie, why don't we take a moment? Why don't you tell our audience who you are, what makes you so special, and what are we talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Who am I? Right now, I'm a full-time founder. Prior to leaving corporate America to go to bet on myself, to go all in on my company sales team builder, I was individual contributor, penetrating enterprise C-suite, as well as a sales leader. So I've made over 100,000 cold calls, have been in sales leadership most of my career, and I am very, very passionate about outbound sales motions. I know that's not everybody's favorite, cold calling, cold emailing, but when done right, I promise it is very special.
That's awesome. Well, and so if that's what you believe is the key to successful selling these days, would you mind if we just take that a little further and share with us what are your components when it comes to outbound? What do you find works these days? What do you find doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things that do work, because I feel like so much of at least my LinkedIn newsfeed is all of like the don't do this and don't do this and don't do this. But a couple of things that do work. I think one is just the mindset that you have when you are writing emails. Historically, we've taken a very seller-centric approach to outreach and really making sure that you're centering your buyer when you are putting together your cold call script, when you're thinking about your value prop, when you're writing your cold emails. And an easy example is how often in your inbox do you get an email that starts with, I'm Leslie Venetz, your sales executive at blah, blah, blah company, right? Nobody cares. Like, we have simply not earned the right for them to care who we are, what our title is, what the company is. So I think the easiest way to think about writing buyer-centric outreach or creating buyer-centric outreach is if you read the email and it is not extremely clear why it should matter to them, there's not something relevant in there, valuable to them, you probably need to do a bit of a rewrite. So I think the mindset is sort of a big picture way to approach how to outbound correctly to reach the modern buyer. But a couple of other elements are writing really short, really simple scripts and emails. I think in the past, we as sellers maybe felt a little bit compelled to try to make ourselves sound smart or make ourselves sound like experts in areas maybe where we weren't exactly experts. And what it ultimately did was just make it harder to relate to us, make it harder to digest our messages. So those really short and simple, emails, LinkedIn in messages. And one of my other favorites is questioning personalization. I think personalization is something that we get wrong a lot of the time. I'd be curious. I'm going to turn it back on you. What's your take on personalization?
Well, I think people love to buy; they hate to be sold to, and that's. Thank you so much for kind of throwing that back over the fence to me. People love to buy; they love it. People love parting from their own money. I mean, when was the last time someone went to the mall? If anyone's listening, when was the last time you went? I mean, people love it, right? We love doing that. We love parting from our money. You know what I've discovered? That people love parting. What they love more than parting from their own money? Parting from company money.
It's funny. My husband constantly reminds me, because I'm like, I'm putting it on the company card. And he's like, that is your money still, Leslie. And I'm like, right. Yes, Yes, it is. But I agree. It is a little bit easier to spend that company money even.
I think it's the easy part. It's the fun part. It's an experience. And a lot of times, and I personally, I'm a huge outbound freak. I love outbound. And the magic of outbound should be the fact that you're helping them discover. It's not pushy, buy my product. It's, oops, we kind of crossed path accidentally. Don't know if this is relevant. And let the buyer have the experience of discovering, wait a second, I was just actually thinking about, I mean, how many, you said hundreds of thousands of cold calls. How many times have you cold called and someone said to you, oh my God, I was just thinking about that? Or you've just come through, you just burst through an open door. It happens, right? It's not a myth. It happens.
It absolutely happens, particularly because I run a lot of trigger-based campaigns. So when you're running the campaigns to, the exact persona that had the specific trigger event that's in the exact right industry, that happens more often than folks might realize. And you hit on a word, relevant, which I think is the piece of personalization that folks miss so often, that they will personalize because they've been told that they have to personalize, but it's a check the box activity, or they're doing it because saying something like, I see you're the founder of Sales Team Builder is technically personalization, but they'll insert the personalization token and then immediately start selling. They'll say, congrats on your Series A, and then they'll pivot to something completely unrelated to having just gotten funding. So I think that personalization is important, but too often it's becoming that like check the box activity where it's a bit meaningless. And you hit the nail on the head with the word relevant. Like if the personalization token isn't relevant to the rest of what you're saying, if the personalization token doesn't add some value to the context of your outreach, it's going to fall flat.
Fair enough. And so what's the challenge? Is it knowing what to do, how to do it, or why not stay safe, be lazy, act stupid, just check off the box? What's the biggest challenge? Is it changing the habit, changing the behavior, or actually the how?
Yeah, I think it's the how. I talk to a lot of sellers, and I think on the whole, most sellers want to sell better, right? Because it feels better when you make the phone call and the person picks up and says, that's so crazy. I was just talking to my VP about this, or I was just thinking about, right? Like that feels better. It makes the job more exciting. So I think most sellers that they want to do the type of work that gets those interactions. I think often frontline sellers are being let down by their leadership. They're not getting the training and the coaching that they need to understand. We've only been on this for 8
minutes and you're already going to the source of the problem. I was waiting we'd warm up the audience a little before we got down there. Okay. We're there. Okay. Now we're talking.
I mean, I think that is the core of the problem. And that's not to say that sales reps don't have some responsibility if they're not getting the coaching and training that they need inside their organization to look externally. Too often folks treat this as a job instead of as a profession. And if it's your profession, if you're not getting what you need inside of your company, you're going to go externally to listen to the podcast or read the books or get the certifications or join the communities. So I'm not taking all of the responsibility off of our sellers to upskill, but I do think that one of those, like we're talking about moving away from seller-centric to buyer-centric, I do think something that is very rooted in those historical seller-centric ways of selling are management techniques that are focused on things that are super, super, super easy to measure. And it's really easy to measure. Did you put a sentence of personalization in? Like they did it or they didn't. That's a black and white. I think it is much more difficult to measure. Did you add in personalization that meant something to the buyer that moved the needle for the person reading the email?
Yeah. Can I give an interesting example? I was monitoring a call with a client, and we're utilizing Novacy. By the way, this is a good moment to mention Novacy. They're hosting the podcast or supporting the hot podcast. For any of you that don't know Novacy leverage behavioral insights from virtual sales meetings to close more deals. And you want to check them out, novacy.io. That's novacy.io. Want to check them out. Anyway, we were reviewing some of the calls, and someone was doing an outbound, right, a cold call, and they got out of one of those recordings, and it was a set call. It was a set call, and one of these, let's have a demo type of outreach for an SDR, and the SDR did their sort of 30-second commercial, and the prospect said, I can't believe that's what you saw. That's exactly I was thinking about that today. Do you know what the SDR did? What did you think? They're like, really? I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. And they just went, and they ruined the whole, and it's like going out. It's like going out, meeting someone at a bar, right? Meeting someone at a bar and introducing it, right? And then saying, all right, tell me, right? So enough about you. Let's talk about me. I mean, it was horrible. It was horrible. And you
painful
talk about
to watch, I'm sure.
Painful to watch, painful to hear. And you think a little bit about, what does personalization mean? What does paying attention mean? And all that person needed to do was just say, really? I'm surprised. Tell me more. That's it. And they weren't anywhere close. Now, they learned the lesson, which is great. I'm fine making a mistake as long as we don't make the same mistake over. But when we talk about personalizing our approach, and you're mentioning the emails, that's great. But what about that actual interaction? What does that really look like from, I think with sellers, a lot of what we're seeing today, and I'm not here to complain about sellers. I think bottom line is, we all want to make money and we want to make a living, and selling is a noble profession. We deserve respect, but we also have to earn that right to get respect. And paying attention is a currency. And sometimes we're too focused on being self-centered, ego. The ego's really just driving that opportunity. So I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts when it comes to putting that ego aside, personalizing the interaction, making it more about the buyer, making it less about the product, less about the solution. And where do you see that approach evolving from this point on? Because you have your own business now, and you're very successful, and looking forward with all AI coming in and everyone's looking for shortcuts. What is your vision of where we were, where we are, and where we need to be?
Yeah, it's a topic that I think about a lot, not only because I am selling myself, but I lead an interactive coaching workshop series. Like it's one of the things I do with Sales Team Builder. And one of my most popular workshops is on active listening. And I take folks through a 4R framework. And the second step is resist. And gosh, the rep that you just shared the story on, they really could have used this resist training before they got on that call. And I think there's two reasons that resist is very difficult. One is that active listening is tough. Like it truly is. It's a skill set. It's something that we have to grow and practice. It does not come naturally. And when we think about resist, folks default to assuming that resist means resisting the temptation to interrupt. But it means so much more than that when it comes to active listening. It means resisting the temptation to start thinking about the next thing you're going to say. So you stop really listening to the person because you're now focused on, you can't wait to say your thing. It's resisting the temptation to jump in and share a relatable story, which I get. Like that's the direction that I try to go. I'm like, oh, I have something similar that happened, but what I'm doing is taking the spotlight off of them and putting it on me. That's not active listening. It's resisting the temptation to judge, or even very likely in sales situations to assume that you know what they're trying to communicate because you talk to this ICP all the time. You hear this problem all the time.
We don't. Yeah. But no mutual mystification.
Absolutely.
No mutual mystification.
So I think part of the challenge is really deploying, like flexing that resist muscle in active listening. And I think the other piece of that, James, that makes active listening especially difficult for salespeople isn't what folks would think. It's not because we just are so aggressive and want to shove our product down somebody's throats. It's actually, in my experience, because we are so eager to help, that when somebody says, here's my problem, and we know we can help, we know we have a solution that can solve for that, we stop listening, we stop seeking to understand, we stop that process of discovery, and we jump into helper mode. We think it's helper mode. You know what they see? They see sellers. They see us trying to sell. And it goes back to your, like, people love to buy, hate to be sold to. So when we stop listening and go into that seller mode, the resistance comes up. So those are two big things that I see happening on calls.
I love this. This is just so precise. We work, in Saturn, we work a lot on the psychology of sales. And what you just said right now is so smart and precise, because can I just unpack that for a second from a scientific perspective? So if we unpack that, and you said people want to help, and people do want to help because we're hardwired as human beings to help, right? And if you know, I work a lot around the what's called the drama triangle, Hartman's triangle, if you know it. You've got your persecutor, your rescuer, and your victim. And it's a very popular concept with Sandler. And within that triangle, you'll notice a lot of times salespeople will notice, if anyone's listening to this specific point here, when you're in a situation when you're actually rescuing someone, you will most likely find yourself right back at a persecutor or a victim position. And this is true for work, for sales, for family, for friends, for politics. The reason this happens is because when we go into a scenario and we're with someone else, by the way, this can also happen in our own mind, but with ourselves, but usually we go in and rescue. We're always going in with expectations. So I'm going to rescue them right now, and they're going to say, yes, let's buy, let's do it. But our expectations never align with their expectations. And so what happens is the conflict starts, and then it's either victim or if anyone has any teenage children at home or kids, they're not children, but if anyone has teenagers at home or any kids at home, you know what I'm talking about. This is very apparent around a family environment. But in sales, it happens quite a bit. And I want to thank you, Leslie, because you just helped me realize that kind act of simply wanting to help, it just gets us into trouble. I think Grandma once said that. Careful who you help; it'll only get you into trouble. Is that a thing? Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Resist the urge. Resist the urge to help. Stop being emotional. Get your rational mind in there. Stop being emotional. And another thing I find, also, I'm just going to piggyback off what you said at the beginning. From the email perspective, stop making your messaging intellectual BS. No one cares. The intellectual mind, the cortex, can't even process that fast. And so that's just my take on what you're saying. And so first of all, you know your stuff, and I love it. That's great. Leslie, I got to ask you. Here it is, the big question. What's your secret sauce of selling?
My secret sauce of selling. So I feel like the easy answer maybe is like following my own earn the right methodology and like really challenging myself to go back and make things buyer centric. Because even as somebody who like lives and breathes buyer centricity and teaches it, oftentimes my default is still centering myself in the messaging, and I have to like come correct and challenge myself and repurpose. But I feel like that's too easy. And I think a huge part of my secret sauce is time management.
Ooh, tell me more.
Yeah, I am like kind of obsessive about time management. And I have been since very, very early in my career. My very first sales role, I didn't realize how messed up it was until I was on the other side of that role, but it was a player coach role. I had a huge team. Like at one point I had 16 direct reports, way more direct reports than any human being should ever have, because data tells us we can do like 8 or 9 tops before it just is bad. But I had a huge team of direct reports. I was carrying my own quota. It was a transactional sales cycle, so very, very fast paced. I was also responsible for hiring. And when I say hiring, I mean like writing the job adverts through, deciding where to post them, doing the screening, doing the interviewing, doing the onboarding. Like it was a crazy, crazy role. But what I realized months into that job was that I needed to get way, way better at time management. So I went a bit down the time management rabbit hole as a new, as a new professional. I was fresh out of college, fresh into sales. And a few of my favorite things are time blocking, or folks might know it as like clustering, or the concept of picking one task and eliminating all other distractions and only doing that task. So really early in my career, when I was doing a ton of cold calls, I would time block out my cold calls and, turn off Slack, put my phones off. Like the only thing I was doing was picking up the phone. And if I needed to do research after a phone call, I would write a note and I would do it after. If I needed to send a follow-up email, I would write it on my to-do list and do it after. And I mean, there's so much I could talk so much about time management because I love it. But if I'm going to leave people with one single time management tip, like that secret sauce tip, it is fully committing to that focused task and removing excuses. Because too often I describe something like that and it's an immediate no for people. I couldn't turn off my Slack for an hour. Like, yes, you can. You're not that important. Be like, I couldn't wait an hour to send this email. Like, yes, you can. I mean, like, if you're that worried about it, ask your prospect if they can wait 30 minutes.
Resist the urge. Resist the urge again.
Resist the urge. But I think because sales in general is a profession where we are kind of always in a state of like that, hyper arousal, hyperactivity.
Yeah.
We instill a sense of urgency inside of ourselves. Like, nobody is telling us that we have to send the email immediately, or that we have to respond to the Slack message within 60 seconds of getting it. We've just internalized this false urgency. So removing some of that false urgency and replacing it instead with a single focused time boxed activity, that allows you to be just better. Like, you're making better cold calls because you are in the mind space. You're doing that same sort of script conversation over and over again. So you're getting into the flow, and you're able to just be more productive because you're not, trying to multitask and lose attention. So that's one bit of my secret sauce.
I love it. And here's the thing. And the beautiful thing about that, Leslie, is that you just shared a behavior. Most of my guests here share a technique, and you shared a behavior. And at Santa, we believe that behavior rules. It's king. And as a professional prospector, you know that is true. Can I just tell you a really funny short story about time management? CEO calls me up. CEO I'm working with calls me up. Says, James, listen, I need to come down. I need to do a boot camp for my entire company on time management. I said, okay, Dave, I'll come down. I said, like, how much is it going to cost me? And I'm like, look, probably looking at around, I don't know, 50 grand. He says, okay, I'll do it. And I said, listen, Dave, while I have you on the phone, can I make a suggestion? He's like, yeah. He says, listen, what do you say we do it in one day? He says, okay, that's better. I said, but it'll cost you more. He says, fair, no problem. It's better for me. I said, how much? He said, 100 grand. I said, okay. I said, let me ask you another question. Let's pretend we do it in half a day. We do a half-day thing. He says, it's going to be more expensive, isn't it? I said, of course it is. 300 grand. He says, okay. I said, let me ask you this. Let's pretend I come down and tell you and do it in an hour. How much would you be willing to pay? He said, James, I know you're playing with me right now, but I will play along. How much is it going to cost me? I said, $500,000. He says, done deal. I said, Dave, let me ask you this. Let's pretend I come down. I stay with you for 10 minutes. And I whisper in your ear the solution for time management, the secret to time management. Would you pay me $1 million? He says, look, I know you're playing. I know this is a game. I'll play along. Let's do it. I said, okay. Well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I ain't going to charge you $1 million.
Unless you're willing to write that check, and then maybe.
The bad news, yeah, absolutely. I won't charge you $1 million to tell you the secret to time management. And he says, okay, well, what's the bad news? The bad news is you can't manage time. It's impossible. We can only manage our own behaviors. And on that note, Leslie, I'm going to be honest. I hope some of my other guests recently, you don't get offended. You've been my guest of the month because behavior is king, and that's what it's all about. It's about being true to ourselves. It's about being true to what we need to do, not what we need to say, not what we need to impress, not what we need to talk about. It's what we actually need to do. It's the discipline, it's the action, it's the courage. So thank you. I appreciate that so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
And it's so true because you see in sales, I mean, I'm sure this happens in all professions, but we'll talk to what we know. So many people selling number one script will 10 times your revenue, or like this template guaranteed to 50% increase your pipeline. And here's the catch. I mean, first of all, it's BS. But second, it doesn't matter how great, like you can have the perfect script or the perfect template according to XYZ percent. But if you are not going onto those calls with confidence, if you are not approaching your day with the behaviors that allow you to act, effectively and productive, like if you don't have those behaviors and those mindsets that allow you to then apply the tools, you're not going to get the success that you've been promised.
Can I ask you a tough question? Could you describe your ICP? Well, it's not so tough, actually. Could you describe your ICP or ideal client profile? Because if anyone's listening to what Leslie's saying right now, and as it resonates, and you're her ICP, you might want to reach out. What's your ICP, Leslie?
Yeah, absolutely. Teams of 10 plus quota carriers sitting at that 10 million plus revenue, people that have fully fleshed out their product market fit, they have their tech stack, and they're ready to take their outbound to the next level. So I pick up a lot of folks because I work with, I was sharing this off camera that I really decide who I want to work with based on mindset more than just strict like ICP criteria. So I'm really looking for folks who have realized that they can't rely only on inbound, or realize they can't rely on this sort of like shoot from the hip outbound approach. They need to create these repeatable processes. They need to create copy that is relevant, that is valuable, that's buyer-centric.
Yeah.
And they're excited to go to the next level, but they understand that to get to the next level, they will have to question some of those outdated practices and mindsets that are rooted in that like historical sales-centric approach.
I love it. Awesome. Great. And can I share what my ICP is?
100.
My ICP is my ideal client is someone that is willing and able to make a gutsy decision. That's it. No matter who they are. I think we're aligned. I love it. One last thing, Leslie, anything interesting you're listening to? Any cool books you're reading? Any podcasts? Anything? Any kind of content that you're really kind of devouring right now that is helping you become better at who you are, better at what you do, better at who you are, and helps you dream bigger and set bigger goals?
Yeah, I am a voracious reader. I actually host a business book club on Patreon. I love reading so much. But this also just blends with our entire discussion. I think like we so often like consume all these posts on this LinkedIn newsfeed, but then don't do anything with it. Or we save all these TikTok videos and we've tricked ourselves into thinking we're going to like go back and use them, and we never do. Or we read books because we can't wait to brag about how we read 50 books, but we don't read them to like digest and understand and use. And so that is why I have the book club, and we have a session in April for Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection, which I just finished, and it's very, very, very powerful. But there's two books that I always recommend to every sales professional. One is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's a well-known book. I just reread it for the second time. And I also did the Art of Negotiation Masterclass, which was really worth it. But there's a ton of free stuff on YouTube. So like, don't put up artificial barriers. You can go to YouTube and get the free stuff if you can't afford the masterclass, if you can't afford or don't want to read or listen to the book. That's a big one. And then also the Challenger Customer. Most folks are familiar with the Challenger Sale. It's fine. It's not my favorite. I think that the Challenger Customer is such a powerful book. And it's for the reasons that we've discussed. The Challenger Sale, pretty seller centric, whereas the Challenger Customer is very rooted in developing a deep understanding of our buyer, of our customer. So love both of those books. But in general, whatever you are consuming, make sure you don't consume it just to consume it. Make sure that you spend time being like thoughtful, intentional, and strategic about how you can test it and see if it's right for you, because everything you learn isn't meant for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well done. Well, it is quite apparent, and the evidence that you are in the right position of running a book club. So you actually are very precise. Leslie, thank you. This has been refreshing, fun, and I love your energy, and you're a force for good. And so thank you so much for your wisdom, and I look forward to seeing you on the road to success and all the marvelous and successful things that you will achieve in the future. And to our listeners, we're wrapping up for another excellent podcast episode. Well, I mean, you'll judge, but it's been good for me. Don't know how it's been. Leslie, was that good? Scale of 1 to 10. What are your thoughts?
I thought that was really good. I mean, well, I'm going to give us an 11. If I'm the judge,
there you go.
11 out of 10 would listen a second time. How about that?
Yep. Awesome. I appreciate that. And so sellers, sales leaders, if you're out there, focus on your buyers. Put your ego aside. Be inquisitive. Be kind to them, and stop helping and stop rescuing and resist the urge. So all the best. Sell well. Be successful. No guts, no gain. And I'll see you next time.